Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Lauren Hollish, and I'm with Belmont Village Lincoln Park, one of our Chicagoland communities. Welcome to our presentation of a new map of life, presented by Dr. Laura Carstensen. I'm really excited for you all to hear some amazing information that the Stanford Center of Longevity has been working on. But before we get started, I'd like to review a couple of housekeeping items. First off, thank you so much for joining us. With this webinar, your video and audio will be turned off as a participant. So if you have a question, please take advantage of the Q&A or the chat feature. And towards the end of the program, we will do a Q&A session where I will moderate some of the questions out loud to Dr. Carstensen so that she can answer. We're happy to make sure that we are getting to as many as we can, but we will keep this presentation to an hour today. So we'll end at the bottom of the hour here. And then there will be an audio recording of this presentation that will be emailed out afterwards. So if you are interested in, sending it to a friend, of course, you will get that. And again, use the Q&A and chat feature for questions. But if you have any questions about Belmont Village, please stay on after the Q&A session at the end of the presentation to learn a little bit more about our levels of care and our communities across the country. Belmont Village is a senior living community that does independent assisted living and 2 levels of memory care. And we really focus on looking at aging as a gift and fostering an environment where seniors, families, and employees can learn, grow, and prosper. So I'm really excited for Dr. Carstensen to talk a little bit about the ways that the Stanford Center for Longevity has been building a culture to support century-long lives. And so to introduce Dr. Carstensen, she's a professor of psychology and public policy at Stanford University. She's the founding director of the Stanford Center of Longevity, which explores innovative ways to solve the problems of people over 50 and improve the well-being of people of all ages. She's the author of A Long, Bright Future, Happiness, Health, and Financial Security in the Age of Increased Longevity. She's got her BS from the University of Rochester, her Ph.D. in clinical psychology from West Virginia University, and holds an honorary doctorate from the Catholic University Leuven in Belgium. And with no further ado, Dr. Carstensen, please take it away. We are so excited to hear from you.
Thank you so much, Lauren. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I appreciate your kind remarks, and I appreciate all of you for joining the session today. What I'm going to talk about is how life is changing in an era where people are living longer than our great-grandparents ever would have imagined. I'm going to say a bit about how aging itself is changing. And then I'm going to turn to a discussion about how we need to build a world that now supports century-long lives, so that at every stage in life, people can engage in the world in a way that conveys a sense of belonging, purpose, and worth. Now, I have to tell you that for years, I've been saying to people, life expectancy is going up, and we have no reason to expect anything's going to change in the foreseeable future, short of a world war or a global pandemic. What happened in the 1918 pandemic, what you see here in this figure is that we saw a tremendous plummet of life expectancy. It actually dropped by 10 years. Related to the 1918 pandemic, but within 2 years, it had recovered and continued to increase well into the 20th century. So when we talk about life expectancy, by default, we generally mean life expectancy at birth. We can also talk about society's aging. And what we mean by that is that the distribution of age in a population is shifting so that the median age is getting older in a population. that we're generating societies where there are more adults and today more people over 60 than children. That reshaping of the population is referred to as aging societies. And because fertility fell by half at the same time, we added 30 years to life expectancy, we've created aging societies all over the world. So in 1900 in the United States, 4% of the population was over 65. Today, that percentage is 14% of the population in the US over 65, and it's expected to increase to 20%, possibly a little more depending on what happens to fertility levels going forward. So we're shifting the distribution of age, which means that the population that we think of as the American population is taking on different characteristics. It's older now, fewer children, more people surviving longer. So many people ask me, well, how long can we live? You know, what is lifespan? So I'll show you a slide I made to use in classes years ago to show the way we think in social science and biological science about aging. What you see here on the x-axis is basically any variable you like, you can put there, from social status to physical health to cognitive performance. And then with age, we see it just go down. Now, I'm not saying these are real data, but this is the way we tend to think about it. And so we test hypotheses about how old people compare to young people. And generally, where we see differences, we conclude that there are deficits. But what we have learned in the last 20 years is that this trajectory of aging is clearly not representative of individual aging. There are lots of individual differences in how we age, and it is not the case that we see just a steady downward trajectory from the time we reach adulthood into very advanced aging. Aging is more nuanced than we ever imagined. And there are two reasons that I want to point out in the next few minutes that we see that we need to appreciate this nuanced story of aging. One is that aging itself is changing. Old age is changing. So what you're seeing here on this image is not age at the bottom, but rather historical time. So we're starting all the way to the left of the x-axis at 1920 going up to 2040. Those are the years. And age, chronological age, is on the y-axis. And so what Chauvin has observed is that at increasingly older ages, mortality risk is actually lower than it used to be over historical time. So you know how people say 60 is the new 40? Well, 68 really is the new 59 for men. Let me show you these data. So what Chauvin finds is that in 1970, males reached a 2% odds of dying in the next year when they were 59 years old. But today, males don't reach that 2% mortality risk until they're 68. Now, for women, it's even a better story, of course, because women live longer than men. And for women, 73 is the new 65. So again, let's look at 1970. When did you reach 2% chance of dying in the next year? It was 65, and that's now 73. So people are healthier at more advanced ages and less likely to be declining, as people often do shortly before the ends of their lives. Now, I said there were lots of different ways to measure health. Another way is functional health. I'll show you some findings there too, because they've been getting increasingly encouraging. What you see here are the results of a survey where they asked people from 55 to over 85 the question, are you healthy enough to work? And what you see here is that the percent of people who answer yes to that question declines with chronological age. But I also want to point out that if you go all the way out here to looking at the group of people 85 and older, half of these folks said they were healthy enough to work. So many people at advanced ages are functioning very well. And there's not a lot of good news going on about dementia, but here's some, and that is that the incidence of dementia has been going down over historical time as well. Now, you'll see headlines that contradict this. They'll say aging societies will have more cases of dementia, and that's true. The cases will go up because we have more older people. But if you look at what are the odds, you take any group of 100 people, what are the odds that 100 people will get them, the incidence of dementia, that's actually falling. And it has fallen not insignificantly. It fell by 20% since 1977. And from 2000 to 2012, it fell from 11.6% to 8.8%. It fell by 24% in a very short period of time. And we think that this is related to education. What I'm showing you on this image is how education pans out in life expectancies as a function of education. I think I misspoke just now, that life expectancy is quite different and functional health is quite different as a function of education. So what you see here in this image is the percent of people who have no functional limitations. That's on the y-axis. That would be at the very top here of the chart. No functional limitations, and the percentage charted as a function of age and education. So what you're seeing here in the green line are people who dropped out of high school. And in the red line, those are people who graduated from college, have more than 4 years or more of education beyond high school. And then the blue line, you're seeing people who had some college, but not a 4-year college education. And look at the differences in functional health related to education. So what you see, if I can draw your attention to these 3 dots all the way to the left panel, outside of the panel, those are people in their 30s. And what it looks like is people in their 30s are pretty healthy functionally, regardless of their level of education. Now go all the way to the right-hand side of this figure, and you're seeing people at 85. And there again, you start to see education converge in terms of functional abilities. As people get to very advanced ages, most of us experience some kinds of limitations, whether it's walking or reaching or driving or other kinds of limitations that people have in life related to cognitive functioning, for example. But what you see here in the middle are wide discrepancies in how well people are doing as a function of how much education they had. So if you look at 75-year-olds who have more than 4 years of education, college education, they're more likely to be physically fit at 75 than people who dropped out of high school when they're 65. And so we're seeing this increase in functional health as a function of education. Education is a powerful predictor of how well people do as they age. And much to our surprise, I say our meaning social scientists, but society's surprise as well, is that old people are doing better than younger people emotionally. Now, when I was in graduate school, which I must admit was a very long time ago, it was textbook knowledge that older people were likely to be depressed or anxious. I remember having a textbook in a clinical psychology course that I took that had chapters on, it had a chapter, it started on depression, and it had a chapter on anxiety, a chapter on substance abuse, and then it had a chapter called old age. Old age itself was synonymous with psychopathology. And when we began to actually collect data and to study older people and to see how they were doing, it turns out that older people have lower rates of every form of psychopathology than younger people, with the exception of dementia. the dementias, which are, of course, brain diseases by definition that occur in old age. But aside from that, anxiety is lower rates, substance abuse, lower rates, depression, lower rates we see in older people. And it's not just psychopathology. It's not just diagnosed pathology. It's how people are doing in their day-to-day lives. Older people report more positive emotions and fewer negative emotions than younger people do. Now, there are a lot of different theories about this, and one theory is that older people are more able than younger people to avoid stressors. And so when the pandemic appeared, my research group said, well, this would be a time to look at that because this is an sustained, inescapable stressor that we're all living through. And if anything, as I mentioned earlier, it's affecting older people more than other age groups. And so we put a survey into a representative sample of Americans. And what we found is that older people are experiencing less negative emotion and more positive emotion than younger people are. This has since been replicated in one paper I just reviewed. It's been replicated in 63 countries. So it's not just the United States. There's something about aging that allows people to build resilience. And overall, older people seem to be more inclined to look at the bright side of life, to look at what's good and not to dwell so much on what is bad. So when we think of these aging populations, we have to say to ourselves, if older people are knowledgeable, let's say more expert in whatever areas they pursue than younger people are. So we have a population that is knowledgeable, emotionally balanced, and something I haven't mentioned, but they also tend to be more pro-social than younger people. They care about other people and communities more so than younger people report. Younger people report, sort of having to focus on themselves and their own advancement. With age, we come to focus on groups that we care about and their advancement and their well-being. So that's the population that's growing. And at the Stanford Center on Longevity, what we say every time we get a chance is that may be the only natural resource in the world that's actually growing. How do we think about societies and use this kind of a population to make life better for everybody? We need to improve older ages, but we also need to think about how the presence of older people may improve the world for younger people. Longevity is, what are we going to do with these very long lives? So if we say we were handed 30 extra years, no strings attached, what should we do with them? And we began in 2018 a big initiative that we labeled the New Map of Life. And we started it by inviting about 50 people, experts from business, industry, academics, philanthropists. We brought them together for a day and a half in a room. And we said, we need to begin to envision what a healthy, satisfying, purpose-driven 100-year-long life looks like. Because if we can't envision it, we aren't going to attain it. And we spent a couple days debating, what was realistic, what was possible, what was achievable. And we decided that there was an awful lot that could be done, that we know already that could change, that would help people live longer and healthier lives. One of the first things we need to ask ourselves is, where should these extra years go? While we were having this meeting, we had a cartoonist who was drawing on these big, wall-sized papers on the side of the room and was adding things that people mentioned and percentages and statistics and what people were doing at different stages in their life. And it became clear that lives are really busy up until 65, 70. And that's where we tacked on all the extra years of life. So we get the life, we live our lives pretty much the way we've been living them all along, and then we get longer retirements. Seems that that's not good for anybody. the vast majority of Americans can't save enough money working for 40 years to be able to not work and support themselves for another 30. So it's placing great financial strain on families and individuals. But it's also, it shows us that vacations that last 30 years are not particularly good for people. And having no time for vacation, that is this middle of life, if you look here, where you're raising kids, reaching the peak of your careers, taking care sometimes of older relatives as well. We got a lot going on in middle age, and it's like bingo, now nothing. And neither one of those models is working well for people. And so at the end of this meeting, we said to ourselves, well, if we walk away from this meeting today and say, well, that was interesting, we had a good time, then that would be a great shame. And so what we did instead was to raise funds that allowed us to support 9 postdoctoral fellows. These were scientists at Stanford and elsewhere who came to Stanford, who had expertise in a variety of different areas, from medicine. We had a couple of MDs here, sociologists who are focused on intergenerational relationships and families, people who are in fitness experts, a child neuroscientist, economists, and a climate scientist who's thinking about energy use and exposures to pollutants, and another fellow who was studying built environments and how they affect people. And we supported them for 2 years while they worked together. They met weekly. When COVID began, we had them still meet weekly, but now on Zoom, and they continued to talk to each other as they were developing deep dive reports on each of these domains, which critically support people through their lives. And what we're doing now, we're just about to release a report that interweaves these ideas together into something that we will launch as a new map of life. And we'll be doing a lot of work with media, with op-eds, with journal articles to magazine articles, aiming to get people to change the conversation from this white-knuckled approach about, oh my gosh, we're living so long, all these problems, what are we going to do, to say, we've got some real challenges here. Let's get to it. Let's go make it right, so that when people arrive at 100, they're feeling a sense of belonging and purpose and worth. And I will stop there, and I'll be happy to take your questions. I'm interested to hear what you have to say. Thank you.
Well, first off, Laura, thank you so much for going through your amazing statistics and just information. I think that it is so eye-opening to see the way that aging has shifted and just the population in general. We've got some great questions. One of the questions we received is the effect of education on functional ability actually tied to income and better healthcare?
Yeah, what a great question. There are some sociologists who have looked really closely at this issue and tried to tease them apart. Now, first, let me say, in the way people live their lives, it's really hard to tease them apart, because it tends to be that people have higher levels of education make more money. So in day-to-day life, they're confounded. But social scientists have really tried to tease them apart, and it appears that education is a better predictor than income of staying functionally healthy. So to be able to retain your health is related more to education than money. But how quickly you decline, this is why this question is really, really informed, interesting question. How quickly you decline if you do get sick is best predicted by income. And so it does appear that both are playing a role, but the protective effect seems to be coming more from education than it is from income.
Interesting. No, that was a very good question.
Yeah, that's a great question.
No, great question. And then, what can we actually learn from Eastern cultures about their effect on life expectancy?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we can learn from all cultures about life expectancy, but some of the longest lived populations and countries are Asian cultures. Japan right now vies with Singapore for longest life expectancy, although Monaco's up there too, but we kind of write them off. Asian cultures do something different socially. They tend to have cultures that are where people are identified with the community more so than in the US, where we tend to have more of a autonomous, individualized approach to life. And in Asian cultures, I don't want to over generalize, but they tend to be more connected. And so we do see that social piece of it. And you've probably heard about a journalist named Butler who went around to blue zones and tried to find the areas of the world where people live the longest, these little pockets of places. And in all of those, people are really socially connected across generations. And there are roles for older people in societies, generally speaking, although there it does vary by which Asian culture we're talking about. But to the extent that people are engaged with families and communities, we do better. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. Yeah,
no, absolutely. And what is the impact on happiness and resilience among those 65 plus with satisfaction and happiness during their younger household life? So is there a correlation between when you're younger, your mood and outlook on your happiness and resilience when you're older? And further, with the disruptions on work, on family life of younger generations, will the likelihood of the future happiness and resilience continue? So I think overall, this question is asking, if you're younger, just as your image just shows with the cartoons, which was really a powerful image, if you're so busy when you're younger, does that impact your happiness later? And, will that change with this next generation?
These are great questions. We don't really know the answers to them, but that doesn't stop me from trying to address them. So a couple things. One is a lot of these studies about emotional well-being and happiness were cross-sectional. That is, there's studies that compare people in their 80s to people in their 40s to people in their 20s at one point in time. And so most of them were age differences, but we couldn't really say that was development. So were younger people who were miserable becoming happier as they get older, or were these generational differences? It could be that the greatest generation is and always was the greatest generation, just a more resilient bunch, but that we younger people, and I shouldn't say include me there as a younger person, but you, Lauren, can you expect to be happier when you're older? It does appear that within individuals, people get happier. My group has now done a longitudinal study where we followed people over a decade, and the age range began at 18 to 94, and then we still had people at 94 at the 10 years later. And what we saw is that emotional well-being improves, and the biggest part of it with age, but the biggest part of it, the most steepest increase, is from say 40 to 60. That's where we really see a lot of increase. So it isn't clear that individual differences in how happy you are will predict how happy you are later, although personalities are pretty stable. So if you're an extroverted, happy 25-year-old, you're more likely to be an extroverted 25, or 85-year-old. So there are some personality consistencies, but despite that, it looks like people get happier. Marriages get happier, by the way, over time. A lot of people think of older marriages as being, these, sort of devoid, bored, distanced kind of thing. And it looks like marriage gets better over time too. And when the kids leave home and go off to, start their own lives, marital satisfaction returns to honeymoon.
Goes right up.
Right up. Right up.
That I believe. So this is a really good question. Kind of going into the longevity of sustainability. And so do you think our planet can sustain our species if 50% of us start to live into our 100s? We're on the verge of a housing crisis. Most people can't pay for their care as it is. What happens when people start living for a decade in senior living?
Yeah. Well, I don't want to say this in front of you, Lauren and Susan, but I don't think we're going to be living in senior housing necessarily 50 years into the future, only because I think people will be much healthier. So let me say that we'll have places like this, but it'll be different. I mean, 20 years ago, people would move into nursing homes and live there for 30 years. That doesn't really happen anymore, right? Because people are functionally able to live independently for a longer period of time. So, and I in no way am saying there won't be a need for Belmont Village. There will be for lots of them. And there'll be more people who are older, but I don't think people will live in them as long as they do, but we'll have more people, right? So, but here's the best news. A lot of people think this, if people are gonna live longer, we'll have overpopulation. And the predictions are that by mid-century, the global population will begin to decline. And we're seeing evidence already of populations declining in the Western world. The question is really, when does this reach the African continent and India and other parts of the world as well? But there's every reason to think it will. So here, the aging societies, remember, come from two phenomena, are produced by two phenomena: people living longer and having fewer children. So we'll probably have a smaller world population, which is great for the climate, great for the environment, but there'll be fewer people born, right? So we have fewer, the population itself is smaller, but people who are born live out their full lives. That's where we're headed. And that's different. Now, let me say, it does really, we have to think a lot about how to help people prepare financially for lives that are starting to come to, where 100 becomes typical. Then retirement at 65 is not going to work for the majority of people, and it's not going to work for societies. And keep in mind too, that the policies we have were developed on the assumption that we have lots of young working people paying into a system that's supporting relatively few older people. Now we have a population that's more rectangularized, but it doesn't mean we can't develop policies. It just means we don't base it on that assumption. And so that's what we really need to get to when we think about financial security. So world population will not increase. On the contrary, it is expected to decrease, and country populations already are decreasing. We see them going down in Japan. I mean, there are demographers who are taking bets on when the last Japanese citizen will remain standing. It doesn't take that many generations of having fewer than replacement level numbers of children before populations begin to decline, population size. And that's what we're going to see worldwide.
Interesting. And, I think you just touched on a great point, and this is actually going to be our last question of today, although I'm getting some great questions in. The financial implications of living to 100 and retiring at 60, 65, that might not be the reality going forward, not only from a financial implication, but also from a purpose standpoint. And we got a great question here from an 83-year-old female who's a talk show host and publisher of a senior/boomer magazine with a gerontology master's degree. But if she wanted to work for a company, she would be worried that the HR person would immediately toss out her resume. What can we do about that and kind of ageism in the workplace if we are living longer, need that income, and also that purpose?
We need to work longer, and we need to work differently. Often when I'm giving lectures to community groups, I say we need to, we need to rethink retirement. And I hear groans in the audience. It's kind of like, no, don't tell me I never can retire. And then I say, well, would you trade retirement for working 3 or 4 day work weeks throughout your working career? And all of a sudden I got them right in my hand. We can do that. There's nothing magical about working 40 hours a week. And by the way, most Americans are working more than 40 hours a week. We aren't very good at vacations. We work way too hard. So we've packed a whole lot in the middle, making work pretty miserable. The least satisfied people in the workforce are parents of young children, because They want to be good parents and they want to be good employees. And each day they have to make a choice which one they're going to focus on. So we have a lot of problems with work, and it's not just about retirement, it's how we work throughout life. What we are arguing is that we should have much more flexible work, and people need to work longer, working some number of hours, and it will vary. It might be that you work many fewer hours when you have young children in the home and you are engaged full-time when those children start to leave the home or reach high school or something. And that's when you really get engaged work-wise. Maybe that's when you want to do 50, 60-hour work weeks. And then when you're 80, maybe you want to get down to 10 or 15 hours a week. So we need to have more choices for people, more options. And we think that they will come for two reasons. One is we're doing, my research group is now doing research on work. And it looks like older workers, let me give you just the one-line zinger here. Looks like the presence of older workers in a workforce increase the productivity of younger workers. That is, having people in the work team who are emotionally balanced, who care about helping others, who are mentors for younger workers, is really good for the bottom line for companies. And I think it's not just our group, but I think when these kinds of findings reach employers, we're going to see big changes in ageism. And suddenly we're going to say, you know, we're going to need some more of those folks. So I think things will change. I completely agree and totally sympathize with the woman who asked this question, because today there's a lot of ageism and it's well documented in the workforce. We're trying to change it. And I think some empirical evidence will go a long way toward achieving that.
And you're getting a lot of like comments of yes, yay, as you're explaining 3 or 4 hour or 4-day work week. So I think you have a small segment or study group right now agreeing with you. But Laura, thank you so much for providing such great insight. You know, we've gotten a lot of great questions. If anyone wants to send those questions to me, I can send them along to Laura for follow-up. But at this time, I'd actually like to introduce Susan Berger, who is with Belmont. She's been with Belmont Village for so long now, and we'd love to tell you a little bit more about how we are providing opportunities for lifelong learning, you know, care, but also purpose and a new chapter for older adults. You know, at our Lincoln Park community here, our average age is 81. And so some of our folks moving in are even in their late 60s, early 70s, and they have a lot of life to live, even if they need a little care. So I want to pass it over to Susan and say thank you again to Laura. We really appreciate you joining us, Laura, and take it away, Susan.
Thank you, Lauren. And Laura, what an amazing presentation.
Thank you.
For 24 years, Belmont Village has owned and operated best-in-class, fully licensed senior living communities, founded on the belief that all seniors deserve to live self-directed lives in a supportive community, filled with new friendships and interests, safety and security, quality and value, and a place that they all can call home. At Belmont Village, it's all about quality of life. It's about health, energy, and purpose. We want all of our residents to stay healthy and active, and in so doing, to live well. And our goal every day for every resident is to support that healthy lifestyle. We know that what you eat and drink, how much you exercise, and the way you socialize are all equally important to successful aging. But we also believe in a person-centered approach in providing our services, and residents receive help with activities of daily living as needed. Although residents' needs may vary, they can count on our caring and compassionate staff, committed to providing high-quality, person-centered care. Residents can also count on our Belmont Village nurses. Those are trained medical professionals who are there dedicated to serve the healthcare needs of each of our residents. Our nurses are very keen observers, and they can quickly assess changes in residents' health. And most importantly, They're on site 24 hours a day to provide peace of mind for residents and their families. And at Belmont Village, we know that successful aging also involves staying active. Whether our residents want to kickstart their day with group fitness or one-on-one exercise, our goal is to help stimulate both their minds and body at whatever level they feel successful. And what better way to stay physically engaged than under the watchful eyes of our team of licensed physical therapists on site and a state-of-the-art gym fully equipped for their use. And to specifically address the needs and abilities of residents with mild cognitive impairment and early stage memory loss, we have pioneered a comprehensive therapeutic program that we call our Circle of Friends. This is a whole brain fitness lifestyle, and it's one that combines our highly regarded wellness model with mental fitness and has proven to have a profound impact on addressing the needs and abilities of residents with early stage memory loss so that they too can stay involved, build confidence, and have happy, fulfilling days. We believe in a just right challenge, one that encourages our residents to stay involved, maintain brain function, and build confidence. This innovative approach to memory care is now changing how providers and families now look at assisted living and memory care. I'm very proud to say that in Belmont Village communities across our country and Mexico, we strive to create a positive experience for all of our members. Those include our residents, their families, and our employees. And year after year, we continue to set new standards in resident and family satisfaction. We've also been recognized as a great place to work and named to Fortune magazine's top 50 best workplaces for aging services by our over 4,000 employees nationwide. As we all know, happy, dedicated employees make for happy residents and their families. I know choosing a senior living community can be one of the most important life decisions. Please don't wait for a crisis to react, but take the time to compare how you want to live your life. If you have questions about Belmont Village or our Circle of Friends, I do hope that you will give me a call or send me a text. My phone number is 424-232-0701, and my email is sberger@belmontvillage.com. Thank you all so much for joining us today, and I look forward to seeing you at our very next event.